Welcome to the Happy Rebel podcast, where we explore the sacred in between, the liminal spaces where healing, growth, and transformation take root. I'm your host, Kelly Street, therapist, coach, and the heart behind Happy Rebel, where we blend self-development practices with the tools to support your journey. It's my mission to help others embrace both the light and the dark within us. Here, we dive deep into living authentically, navigating transitions, and finding meaning in the shadows. You'll hear soulful conversations and practical wisdom shared by guests, along with my own teachings and reflections. So whether you're seeking guidance through a tough transition, looking to ignite your creativity, or craving a deeper connection with yourself, you're in the right place. This is the Happy Rebel podcast. I'm so glad you're here. I invite you to just let your eyes rest or close them if you're able, taking a deep breath into your belly and exhale through your nose or mouth. As you start to drop in and prepare for the conversation ahead, I just invite you to notice the sensations in your body. Notice if there are places of holding or tightness. Notice if there are places where there's openness and expansion. Most importantly, just noticing what is happening in your body. Taking another deep breath in and out, preparing to be open-minded for the conversation ahead, the dark and the light, the good and the bad, the easy and the difficult to hear. And with that, returning to this moment, ready for the conversation ahead. Hey, Dr. Mel, I am so excited to have you here. I know there are like a million topics we can and probably will get into. So first, I would love to have you introduce yourself to our listeners.
Thanks for having me, Kelly. That was lovely to experience that. So for your listeners, I'm Dr. Mel. I am a chiropractor. I am a holistic mentor and guide to healers, leaders, and entrepreneurs, helping them turn trauma to triumph for really all of humanity. And I love playing in the intersection and guiding people in health, in human consciousness, building businesses. I say I like to play in the realms of science, somatic strategy, and spirituality, and really helping people transmute and transform fear and survival instincts to more confidence and courage and clarity and certainty in all realms of their life. So I do a lot of things, but I'm here to embody holistic healing and teach people how to really heal their own bodies and minds at the core.
That is incredible. Healer to healer. I love it.
Healer, yes.
So one of the things that strikes me about you is that your mission, when I hear it, I'm like, whoa, that is big.
It is big.
That is bold.
It's a tall glass of water.
Yeah. And I think that's not to say that we shouldn't have big mission. Like, I think it's incredible that you have a big mission. I am going, wow, how does one get to the place where they can hold that much of a mission, like that much power in yourself to be able to say, here's what I'm about. And yeah, it's big.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Kelly. And I receive that. When people have me on podcasts, it's like, yeah, where did the cracking open begin when it comes to being able to hold a big vision? And I would say, when I was younger, I definitely had my own experience of the world waking me up, you could say. And I know I shared with you kind of offline in my bio, I've gone through my own turbulence growing up as a kid with divorced parents, with sexual rupturing, with a lot of overachieving and over pursuing with not a lot of receiving. So definitely went hard into like my masculine, you could say. I would say defaulting from what some may call a trauma response. And that overachieving served me well until I kind of ran out of fuel, you could say. So I had a lot of wake up calls throughout my life. And just to kind of collapse the timeline and brief you on that, my kind of first wake up call was when I was playing rugby. That's what got me into chiropractic school. And I went from feeling like I was on top of the world to feeling like, wow, the very thing that I felt, athletics was a way that I often was escaping kind of the turbulent reality I grew up in. I felt like I went from being on top of the world and having this outlet for my own spiritual and embodied expression to, oh my gosh, the very thing that was giving me joy was taken away from me. And you know how sometimes you can't you don't really realize how the universe is serving you until you look back in time. You're like, wow, those dots actually were meant for me. And so
Oh,
that was one
yes.
of those moments where I injured my shoulder, couldn't sleep for, 2 weeks unless I was sitting up. I went from feeling like I was 20 years old to 80 years old in like a moment. And that injury led me on a path to discovering chiropractic, healing my own body. A lot of other things were going on in my body at that time that I think were definitely repressed memories, repressed experiences from childhood. I know I'm kind of like coming out of the gates. I am an intense person, and I don't really I just go deep into stuff. I figured this is the Happy Rebel podcast.
Yeah, this is the place to do that.
Okay,
We go deep. I
cool.
don't do small talk. I don't
Right.
like it.
I sense that from you. So I was like, yeah, let's just talk about trauma and healing and sexual ruptures and just right into it.
Yes.
Through chiropractic care, I was able to find more of a sense of wholeness that really inspired me to be like, I want to do this. I want to help people heal their bodies naturally from the inside out. And so through my own healing with chiropractic, when I graduated chiropractic school, I went, I was still in my like overachieving mode right into opening my own practice in 2017. And from then, I've evolved since to turn into more of a holistic guide and mentor to more coaching and guiding women from all over the world to help them embody their own, I call it inner lioness energy. So there's been many moments throughout my lifetime that I realized, as much as it felt like a cracking open and dissolving and woe is me and really like collapsing, those moments have really opened me up to realize like I have such a bigger vision and mission and purpose on this planet. And I think sometimes we don't get that feedback until we're really brought to our knees and surrender. And that takes a lot to like view it from that vantage point of not seeing life as like the victim to life rather, but like, wow, this is happening for me and I'm here to rise and serve others in their own evolution. So that's the quick snapshot of like how I came to be in this big vision and mission for humanity beyond my physical form.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. And it is so interesting. It's that like overnight success idea where it's like, yep, let me distill my path down
Yeah,
into this little tiny snapshot. But really, it's been 10 years of this or 15 years of me figuring out who I am and then building towards where I.
absolutely. Yeah, many moments of that's why when people are like, how did you get here? And I feel like every time podcast host or someone asks me that, it kind of changes. And I'm sure you've had that too, where again, you have these experiences in life and you serve people and you see them evolve and you're like, wait a second, that moment from them, that was actually serving me and developing these skill sets or developing more of whom I am. So it changes every time. And like you said, it's hard to put into like a quick little 5-minute snapshot of who you really are, which I think goes beyond just our storyline, right?
Yes. Yeah. So both listeners and then my clients in my therapy practice know that a part of my story is that I spent like 10 or 12 years in kind of like marketing, sales, that all of that before going into therapy. And lately I've had a lot of people come to me and ask me like, okay, I think I see on your website that you did something before this. Like, what did you do? How do you get into this? And I think there is something just like so powerful and brave to being like, yeah, I am this one thing, but I've also been these other things and I'm still growing, I'm still evolving, I'm still becoming something else. And I think that's one of the things I love about you and your story and who you are, who you're becoming, is that you're like, yeah, I'm a chiropractor. Cool. And also, I do all of these other things because I have these other gifts and talents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned that because life is a process of not just being, but becoming. In the process of becoming, there's often a lot of dissolving and dismantling ways of being or patterns or habits that you thought were you, but perhaps in that moment, it was maybe more of a survival response or more of a default pattern from something that happened in your childhood, right? So I think the process of becoming is just that, the ability to express all forms and all facets of who you are. And I think as women, it can be so easy, and not just women, but anyone, it can be so easy to identify with like a role of what you do for work or what you do for money, or when you're in social settings and you're having these conversations, like, what do you do? And oftentimes people will lead with like how they make money, when in reality, us as human beings and expressing our soul purpose is so much more than that. It's so much
Yes.
more than that. And yet, sometimes I think what happens is, you and I talking before this, like, expressing that bigness and holding that bigness comes with a lot of, can come with, I should say, it doesn't have to, you can alchemize that, but it can come with, what are people going to think of me? Right. Or that judgment or the collapsing, right? I focus a lot on embodiment. And so, what's it like to play bigger? And bigger doesn't necessarily mean more, it can just be more expressed. What's it like to express that bigness within you and also navigate a world that maybe might have some judgments with that, right? How
Mm-hmm.
does our nervous system navigate that? So I love that
Yes.
you mentioned that. I know that was kind of a tangent, but that's a big topic for me right now in my world.
No, that it is. And frank, like it's a big topic for me. It's one that I'm exploring. And I talk a fair amount about my own family lineage of playing small or safe or just, don't get a big head about things, or you really think that people are going to care about what you say or what makes you think you're so special, all of these like just mountain of messages. And it definitely is something. I think one of the things I love about the work you're doing is that these messages are carried in our bodies.
Yes. Yes.
They're not just things that they're told to us. They are things that are passed down genetically. They are things that are also emotionally passed on, and they're like a physical scar, but inside of us.
Absolutely. I have a saying that I teach in my Project Lioness program, which is words matter and words become matter. So even your listeners, if they hear a phrase or they hear someone's story or they hear these comments from family members or wherever these programs come from, there is origins in your soma. And even sensing into it in this moment, like when someone says, like, who are you to do that? Or who are you to go from marketing to be a therapist, right? Or who are you to make hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever? Just noticing how that lands in your body first. Like, does your chest tighten up? Which is why I love in your episodes that you start with like dropping in, because that's where, if you want to play a game of bigness within yourself. And when I say bigness, again, it doesn't mean more stuff, but like more of who you are. It does require us to be able to receive that in our body and notice that as you sense into that, where does that distortion or where does that gripping happen? Where is there still resistance to opening yourself up to receiving more of who you are, even if there's judgment from others, you know? But I think it's such, you're right, it's such a embodied piece. But unless you slow down and actually learn how to tune in to those subtle cues, it can be very easy
Yes.
to just keep powering through. And that was my story for a long time. I just powered through because that's the strategy that worked for me. And I say that the universe will give you these wake up calls in the form of a feather and then a tap on the shoulder and then oftentimes a brick or a Mack truck that's like, yo, you're here for something different. And
Yes.
I'm here to like inform you to maybe like it's time to shift gears, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's always one of those things where like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
Like I tell people like you open the door, you can't close it again or pretend that it's not there.
No. Yep.
Mm-mm. No.
Awareness and consciousness and opening yourself up it's very liberating, and there's also a level of responsibility. I think there's a level of self-discipline because, as you said, once you open that door, you can't unsee it. And so in my perspective, at least, you're responsible to that because there's just a different way of living, and not that that way of living before was, but that's just the nature of human beings evolving. And what got you here is beautiful, and have reverence for that and have love for that part of you. And it's natural to let those parts of you dissolve to become more aware. And I think it's our responsibility, because when we do that, in my eyes, what I see is when someone has more self-love and has a purpose bigger than themselves, they show up in the world very differently, and they want to give freely. Like, if I can do it, then why can't you? Right? If I can own this part of me, then I want other people around me to own that. That's where I feel like the game of life is meant to be played.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a place where I would love to go is that when I think of chiropractic care, I think of a very particular thing. I started doing chiropractic. My parents took me to one starting as a young teen, and so it was like, okay, you get adjusted, hear some cracks, and then also did some acupuncture tied into that, and that was kind of my experience. But I think what I'm hearing is that what you do and what your team does in that realm is so different. And again, so much more.
Yes, very, very different. So I like to say our version of chiropractic, which for those of you who are listening, it's called Network Spinal Care. And I call it Chiropractic 3.0. Not that traditional models of chiropractic that focus on kind of moving joints, there's anything wrong with that. But I think the nature of our understanding of the nervous system and our ability to create safety and what actually delivers results has really changed. Thankfully, there's a lot more science. I do that in quotes because science is always evolving. There's a lot more data to back up how does a human being actually evolve and heal. And we used to think it required so much more effort than I think what it actually does. And the effort has changed as far as allowing the body to tap into its own self-healing mechanisms and strategies. So Network Spinal is really focused on, instead of the restorative model of care of let's get you back to where you were, let's kind of fix these things and put you back together, very three-dimensional. It looks at the nervous system and says, okay, what's working in your system today? Where are you resourceful, even in the midst of pain, challenge, trauma, symptoms? And how do we amplify that in your body and in your physiology and help your brain attune to areas of your body that are safe, that are connected, that have resourcefulness, even in maybe some physical symptoms or challenges that are happening? And this stems from systems theory. If anyone's familiar with systems theory or integral theory, where if you're working with a system like the human body that is living, breathing, dynamic, and it's not mechanistic, it's vitalistic, when you actually amplify things that allow it to feel safer, that allow it to feel connected, to actually connect with pleasure, and where it's like, oh, I can breathe here, that actually cues the system to heal even better, even faster, versus just focusing on the pathology, just focusing on the disease. What you focus on, you get more of. So in Network Spinal, our way of working with the spine is very different. It's much more gentle. People would often say it's like similar, it looks similar to like a cranial sacral or a fascial unwinding. So there's not a lot of like aggressive turning, twisting, popping, cracking. It's so much more focused on the subtleties of the nervous system, of the breath, and where the body is actually moving towards and expanding into versus I always say when new clients that come into the office, I say, what's going to make more sense? You've got some of these blocked doors in your body from physical stress, emotional stress, spiritual stress, technology stress. Does it make more sense for me to try to run through this closed door where sure you maybe get immediate relief, but then it closes back up again because we're not building sustainability? Or does it make more sense for me to find the open door of your system and work with that? You tell me. And that's where oftentimes when you can listen to the body in that way and watch it and be with it, the results are so much more effortless and sustainable. Because that's the one thing I've noticed with traditional chiropractic is you go in and maybe you get the same thing adjusted every single time, depending on the practitioner, and you feel good for like a couple days, but then it's like things kind of go back. And so I had to question myself and say, is that really what I want? Where there's this maybe a revolving door of the same thing every time, when in reality, if we're growing and we're healing, our patterns in our body should be evolving, right? If that's what we
Yeah.
see in
Yes.
life, yeah, and you get this, right? We see this in nature, different. The tree is different kind of every single day,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not separate from nature. So I think it follows more the principles of nature and what healing really is than some of the old school models.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Okay, I'm going to add in a thought here that is in line with what you're saying, but it's a little bit of a sort of might feel like a departure. So there's this person that I follow on Instagram. She posted about how she does a lot of body neutrality. And she posted about looking at pictures of herself from 10 years ago and looking at pictures now. And somebody was like, don't you have judgment that comes up for you of like, oh, I was 20 or 30 or 40 pounds lighter? And she said, no, because my body is not the same body. I am not the same person. I've had 3 children in that time. I've done all these different things. Like, I don't want to be the same person that I was 10 years ago. I love who I am now. So even though my body looks different, I'm going to choose to love this body because this is the body that has gone through all of that. And I feel the same way about like in the work that you're doing, our bodies are supposed to change and evolve. They're supposed to be different. a 40-year-old body is not a 20-year-old body on purpose.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And yeah, you're spot on, Kelly, because the way that network spinal, the paradigm is more reorganizational healing versus restorative. So looking at what's happening in your life now and how do we use that as fuel to the next evolution of you, which is really just, again, more of who you are. And I think to speak to even just some of the body stuff, it's very easy right now in our culture to fall into this, like, you have to look like you're 21 for like the rest of time. And
Yes.
it's, again, I have a lot of opinions about that as a woman, as a holistic healer, as understanding how some of these modalities that we're doing do interfere with the nervous system. Like, sure, yes, it makes you look like your face is very smooth and looks like a baby's bottom. And it is, my thing is, how do we let aging be beautiful? How do we let the evolution of a body be beautiful? And seeing more of that in our culture would maybe give us permission to find other forms of beauty. But we've put such a way of looking on a pedestal that I don't want to say I'm concerned, but I am curious how that will.
I'll say it. I'm concerned.
Yeah, I figured I was in good company here.
Yeah.
And okay to disagree, right? Like, I know I have clients who they choose those certain things because that's what fuels them, and I get it. But we have to remember every choice we make has cause and effect. And that goes for the holistic realm, and that goes for whatever you consider not holistic, right? And that word, I think, is a little even blurred right now, and that's okay. But back to the body changing, there is so much of a pedestal on one way of looking, and I just wonder what it would look like if we celebrated how women change, especially through our years of menarche, through our years of
Yes.
menstrual cycles. And I talk a lot about cycles with women and how to sync your life with your cycle, and even menopause. There's more conversations I'm seeing, but what are the purpose of wrinkles? What's the purpose of, your body morphing when you've had kids? And how can we celebrate that and see aging as a beautiful thing? Because with that comes wisdom, with that comes lived experience, right? When you're 21, your prefrontal cortex isn't even there yet, right? And so it's
Yes.
like someone who has some aging in their physiology has tons of
Mhm.
wisdom to share, and that
Yeah.
to me is beautiful. So I know that might be a little tangent, but your prompt kind of made me think of that.
Perfect. Love it. And I think this is a great step into a word that you said a little bit earlier, pleasure.
Yeah.
And because I think there is a part of our evolving and becoming that if we can learn to let go of the self-criticism, that as we age, we can bring in more pleasure. And I know that's really close to your heart. So tell me what you think about pleasure.
Yeah. I know when I say the word pleasure and I teach on pleasure, people often automatically think of sex, right? Like that just kind of can come to mind, or intimacy. And I like to talk about it as far as the nervous system, and how when I say the word pleasure, I mean literally something that satiates your nervous system. And that could be as simple as, like, I'm in my studio now, I'm looking at your studio, like I find a lot of pleasure in the background of your wall there. Like, that's satiating to me. It's something that I'm like, ooh, I feel lighter when I lean into that. Or I've got like a sheepskin rug next to me, or plants in my office. Like, when I look at that, my nervous system softens, and there's a level of I'm drawn to it. So pleasure at the very core of our being is natural, and it's necessary for healing. And I think when we talk about healing, especially for women, we can get so, I know trauma is like a big word right now in the culture. We can get so fixated on, like, this is what happened to me and I got to do the work and like do the hard work and do the shadow work. And it's like, yes, that is very important. No doubt, being able to expand your capacity for discomfort. But the way we also expand our capacity is leaning into things that bring us pleasure, not infatuation, but what's it like to if you're a business owner, receive a new client? What's that like to land in your body? What's it like when you have more money land in your bank account? What's that like to receive that in your body? And I think what's happened, and what I notice and what I help clients through, is if we have any sort of association of guilt or shame when it comes to receiving pleasure, then we will block all opportunities, especially as women, because our bodies are meant to receive, right? Our feminine energy is in our system, in our body. And so when we can open up and titrate little moments of receiving pleasure in our day, we actually expand our capacity for healing. We expand our capacity to be able to receive. And I don't just mean, again, sexually, but anything that requires you to be more permeable to life coming into you. And that does
Mhm.
require us to look at, yeah, what is your relationship with pleasure? Do you have guilt or shame with that? That's a big thing I see is, oh, if I receive more sexually, or if I receive more in money or clients, or just taking a day off, right? Like just
Yes.
relaxing, there's these programs installed in us, which I do think is very cultural of like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be working more. You should be grinding. Or who are you to take off a whole Tuesday in the middle of the week, right? There's all these different programs that collapse and constrict our ability to just open up and receive. And there is a dance, because when I say receiving pleasure, I don't mean going all the way to the polar opposite and saying that you're greedy or gluttonous, but just little moments throughout the day is something I like to teach from a somatic titration perspective.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of the teaching, so taking little moments throughout the day, what are some of the practices that you work on or recommend with
Yeah.
people? I love giving some little like, here's a take home assignment, everybody.
Yeah. So, one thing that is really important to remember in this is when you think about your nervous system receiving little bits of pleasure, you have to consider your sensory system. So, our eyes, our mouth, our skin, our ears. So, something that I'll do in between client sessions, and honestly, probably after this, because I've been in podcast mode staring at a screen, we can get very myopic. What I mean by that is very focused with our tunnel vision, especially with technology. So, what I'll do, and you guys can even do it with me, is taking a moment, sitting back and looking around your room of wherever you're at, and like noticing what is it in your physical space in your environment that you're like, ooh, I really like the green leaf of that plant. And allow your system, like pause and just look at it, whatever that thing is for you, and pause and look at it and just ask, like, what is it that I like about this? I like the shape. I like the texture. I like the shade of green. I like that it's kind of hidden in these other leaves. And again, I'm just giving you an example, but if there's something in your immediate environment that you're like, you notice that you breathe into it and you open up into it, that's, I call that somatic orientation. So it's a somatic practice where you just open up your system and be like, I really like that. I got some feather earrings that I have. Like, I really like those. And that is titrating pleasure throughout the day. So taking a moment from your tasks, if you're on the computer, you're on client calls like me, and just literally opening up and noticing, like, what do I like about this environment? And just allowing your body to pause. It can take 2 minutes, and that resets your central nervous system to soften and open up versus fight or flight physiology, where we're not even permeable to receiving these little bits of pleasure in our life.
Yes. I love that practice.
It's a juicy practice.
It is. And so simple. And I think one of the things this struck me when you were speaking earlier too about the work that you do with clients in the chiropractic field is that I think we are so used to more, bigger, better, dramatic, intense that we forget that those small things of pausing, looking around the room, finding something that you can connect with and just feel into, breathe into, that like that's the work, people. That is the work that we are supposed to be doing, and not necessarily always these big things. The big moments, the big breakthroughs, I think for me and in my field, the psychedelic therapy, like I love that. I love that as a tool. And also that's not everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because I have done my own journeys. I've had my own catharsis with that, which has been super powerful and super potent in rewiring that default mode network, right? And what I've noticed is now on a daily basis, like the titration. So I like to play in the realms of sometimes cathartic big moments can be very powerful, but then you have to ask the question, okay, how do we create sustainability where you have this big opening in your system? And then how do we then integrate that into our daily life? And these little moments of titration, if you guys remember chemistry, you would titrate like a little bit by a little bit by a little bit. That's what I mean is pausing even for 2 minutes, going on a walk outside. And I know this seems simple, but I found, Kelly, like these little moments of titration have allowed me to maintain that capacity where I don't have to do as much, and the breakthroughs start to become more organic because it's who I'm being in my central nervous system versus chasing more, getting more. And I am a go-getter. That's forever probably going to be my being, but I've learned how to integrate more of this work that's relaxed my system. And I'm not, living off of coffee for 12 hours a day, and I'm not in this fight or flight response where I'm just like, more, 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 I need more, versus like, wait a second. All of that, what I'm looking for is actually here right now, just in another form. And it requires us to open up and just receive it and then allow it to expand in whatever way that is.
Yes, beautiful. So you talk about women having trouble receiving pleasure, or that it being just a lot of conditioning, a lot of trauma around that. I'm curious if you have any perspective around like men, if maybe there's something that in this, especially in this, I think, current paradigm that we're in, if there is sort of a theme you're seeing about what healing work men particularly need to focus on.
I love that you say that. So my brother and I are business partners, and so he does a lot of
Awesome.
men's work. I do have male clients and I work with men, and I would say their way of opening up is different, but there's similar tones of guilt and shame, but kind of at a different angle. And I think for a lot of the men I've worked with, their whole, and every pattern in every person is different, but the themes I sometimes see for my male clients especially is, feeling like they have to have it all together all the time, and there's so much pressure on them to feel like they need to perform and they need to be. And I think the dynamics of masculine and feminine energy are shifting so much in our culture. But what I notice in a lot of my male clients, and where I think the work lies, is they have different hormones than us, and so they naturally are going to have a different experience with that in the world. But taking off some of that pressure that they're alone, and realizing like there are other men who are struggling. And I think it's very common for women to gather in groups, right? Oftentimes we will see, even in the holistic space, women are often the ones making the decisions. That's just a statistic. I don't
Yes.
necessarily agree with that. But I think men often feel, oh, well, if I tap into that part of me and I take off this pressure, that might mean vulnerability, which then may lead to, well, then I can't provide from that state, or I'm weak, or vulnerability equals weakness. When what I see is when men can actually realize, oh, I'm not alone in this experience, and there's other men maybe dealing with this, that can allow them to be like, okay, cool. I don't have to put so much pressure on me to perform or run away from this like guilt and shame type stuff that I see happen in them, again, in sometimes different ways. I don't know if that answers your question,
Yeah.
but that's a lot of what I see in the work that I do.
It does perfectly answer the question. And I think I have heard a few times from male clients or even just men in my life that women will, or they're, especially if they have female partners, will ask them to be more vulnerable to show up in that way. And then when they do, their female partners freak out.
Yes. Yes.
And I have been guilty of this myself as well,
Totally.
where it's like, whoa, wait, like you're supposed to be the strong one. Like you're not supposed to,
Yep.
you're not supposed to fall apart. And I think that reinforces this.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that, because I think the pendulum has swung so far where if we are talking about a male female dynamic, it's important for the woman to also have a level of like connection to her own masculine and self-containment, so that when we are connected to that, we then allow our feminine energy to come through and soften. And I think we've sung so far where we've maybe had men for generations like the hard, tough guy, don't show any emotion. I think we've swung so far where now, if we don't have our own self containment as women, again, I'm speaking to heterosexual relationships, if we don't have our own self containment, then if our male partner is dissolving and we don't have enough capacity, we're going to freak out and collapse and freeze. And then that sends a signal to them like, well, I'm not going to do that again, because it is natural for a male figure to be more of the protector from a hormone perspective. And not that women can't be the protectors. I grew up with a single mom. She played both roles, right? She had the protector and the feminine. But I think it's important for women, if you want to receive that intimacy and pleasure from your partner, it's important for you to understand like what's your level of self-containment for your own level of discomfort. How can you tend to that so that your feminine can come online? But what I was saying earlier is like we've swung so far where now we think we want men to be collapsing all over the place, which I don't think that can serve either, right? Like we
Yeah.
don't want to be just dissolving and so emotionally chaotic. Because then if we haven't gone through that in ourselves, we're going to collapse and freeze and we're right back to where we started. So I know that
Yes.
can maybe feel a little controversial, but I think it's important to say.
I absolutely agree. And I think that we are often afraid to say things like that, especially in the culture that we have now of like, hey, we actually do need this balance of the feminine and masculine. It doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to, you're free to express yourself the way you want to, physically, emotionally, but there is a reality of the giving energy and the receiving energy. And it just is what it is, people.
Yeah, I think
There's a lot of wiggle room within that, but
and I think the pendulum is starting to come back to more of a balance as the universe expands. And that's just a natural thing of life. Like we're going to have swings in our culture and in every dimension of reality. But I think people, especially if you're a woman married to a man or you're with a male partner, I think we want them to be super emotionally expressed. But I think it's like, okay, well, where are you as the woman? Where can you ask yourself to connect with that first? Because I'm a big believer of like know thyself first. Like everything is an above down inside out phenomena. So perhaps what you want in someone else is really a reflection back to you of what you're asking within yourself. And not that you don't want your partner to be expressed, but I think what we think we want may be something that we actually want within ourselves. And men connect differently to their emotions, right? They connect differently to each other, and their way of expressing emotions is just different. And I don't know if it necessarily has to look the same as women, right? Our brains are so different because of our hormones, right? And I can say this as a doctor, like we are designed differently, but that doesn't mean our differences are bad. We each have gifts in how we are, right? I think we used to live in this world of like just being, we should become like little men, but that's not who we are. We're totally different, and there's gifts in each paradigm, and we can't keep comparing each other in that sense. And I like to come back to biology, like that's something I do like to come back to.
yes. And I think you weaving in how you talk about cycles with clients and in particular female clients and how those cycles, how we need to sort of match our energy level or do activities differently. I think it's something that I'm finally starting to embrace and realize is that there are certain times of the month where I don't have as much energy in me to exercise
Yes.
and where I'm like, nope, today is like a yoga stretch day.
Yeah.
Today is not a like, hitting hills on my Peloton class
Yeah.
ride. Like,
Yeah.
just don't have it.
No,
And I think getting to the point where it's taken me 38 years to give myself permission to rest and to go with the flow and cycle that my body is in is like, how did it take me this long?
but at least we're discovering it now, Kelly. I feel you.
Yes.
I love
Yes.
talking about that because I used to be so judgmental of myself when I couldn't keep up with my husband in his training, or when I literally used to go train with the men's rugby team when I was in college because that
Whoa.
was the nature of me and I wanted to get better. And so I thought, well, if I can hang with the guys, that means that I've made it, right? Like that was my mantra because I was so disconnected from my feminine rhythms and the power of that. And that's where, again, I had a wake up call. I ended up in the hospital with extreme knife like pain in my right ovary. Nothing was happening. It was all energetic. But that was a wake up call that said, hey, you've been ignoring this part of you for so long. You can't do this anymore. And this, when I say this, I don't want your listeners to think, well, so I can't go practice with the guys. No, you can absolutely do whatever you want. And you have this beautiful thing called a menstrual cycle. And it is so, so powerful when you can really start to hone in on it and love it and work with it. And it's actually a superpower, believe it or not. I have a whole course
Yes.
on this. I call it The Magic of Your Moon, but it is truly a superpower when you can really honor these cycles. Unfortunately, our culture has created a world where we feel like we have to be on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just women have 28 to 35-day lunar cycles. Men, it's every day. They have testosterone up, down, repeat, up, down. We get a week of that in follicular phase, but then it's different, right? It's different.
Yeah.
And we have to honor these differences and not judge it, not shame it, not think that we need to become just little men, right?
Yes.
As you can
Yeah.
tell. about that topic.
No, I am becoming more and more passionate about women's hormones and health. And then also just really like rewriting the narrative of the menstrual cycle. And I'm sure eventually in, 5-10 years, getting into thinking differently about the narratives of menopause and what that brings in. And I know right now perimenopause is like such a hot topic. Definitely going to keep doing more on that because that's sort of the age that I'm in.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would just love to know if there's any parting, not just parting wisdom, but some additional thoughts that you have about your work that you're doing that you feel like is important to share.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I would say for your listeners, one of the mantras that I say is everything you're seeking often exists within that which you're avoiding in your life. And what I mean by that is have the courage to look at the parts of your life. It could be in your body, it could be in your relationships. Have the courage to start to look at those things with curiosity and say, why is it that I feel I kind of want to avoid this, or I'm maybe running away from this? Because I will promise you that if you choose to go into those parts of your life with curiosity and love and self-exploration, your biggest breakthrough is right on the other side. And it probably may not be as hard as you think if you allow yourself to surrender. So that would be one thing. The second thing is I am such a fan of really teaching people how to trust their bodies more, how to trust their body mind. And so if you take one thing from this episode and you just slow down and you listen to this beautiful vessel, I say your body is your only home. Everything else around us is an illusion. But in this lifetime, in this 3-dimensional, maybe 5-dimensional, 6-dimensional, whatever, in this lifetime, you're occupying this physical meat suit, as I joke. And what would it be like if you took care of it 10% more? What would happen in your life if you really love this vessel that you're in? And perhaps there's something deep inside of you and wisdom that's waiting to be born. So listen to the tap on the shoulder before it turns into a scream, is what I would say.
Oh, I love that. Just sitting with that question of what would happen if you loved this body that you're in. Yeah, simple and sweet. Perfect. Well, you are doing some cool work in the world, and I hope that everybody checks you out. Where would you like people to come find you?
Yeah, so I'm big on the Instagram, y'all. I am very active on there. A lot of what Kelly and I talked about, if you want to go down the rabbit hole into the 17 other dimensions she mentioned, I'm Dr. Mel Krug, so Dr.Melkrug. I also have my own podcast called the Project Lioness Podcast. You can find me on Instagram on there as well, Project Lioness. And all of my courses, all of my offers, I do a lot of free teaching on Instagram stories. So if you guys come over and follow me, say hi, like I will probably actually connect with you and send you a message. Like it is me. I will definitely DM you, but I would say Instagram is where you can find all the cool things.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you for being part of the Happy Rebel podcast community. Stay connected with us on Instagram at Happy Rebel. If you've enjoyed our episodes, please consider rating, liking, and reviewing the podcast. It truly does help us grow. Until next time, this is Kelly Street. Remember, embrace the dark and the light.